West Virginia mountain melody. There's a new river singing to me. Oh, this time it's wild and free. Your West Virginia mountain melodies.
Welcome to Around and About the Clarksburg History Museum, and my special guest today is Joe Gonzalez, former chief of the Clarksburg Fire Department. Joe, thank you for coming today. It's been a pleasure already talking with you this morning.
You're quite welcome.
I understand you have a lot of rich history about the Clarksburg Fire Department, and I want to delve into that. But first, I'd like to know a little bit about you. Like, where were you born?
Clarksburg.
Clarksburg. And what did your
St. Mary's Hospital,
St. Mary's?
1947.
And what did your parents do for a living?
My dad was a coal miner, and my mother did laundry and house cleaning for folks.
Where did your father work? What mines?
He worked the PK mines, which was the Pinnaconnick mine, Consolidation Coal Company number 96. And he had worked there until 1955 when they closed. And then he went to Dola, West Virginia for Clinchfield Coal Company, Compass Mine number 3. And that's when they first opened a mine there. And he worked there until he retired.
How many years did he work in the mines altogether?
46 years.
Did he work with the mules in the mines?
Started out, with the mules, and he did a lot of shooting, used a lot of explosives, and he moved all throughout the mine, different places. When they'd get it ready, he'd come and load up the shot and then dynamite it, and then they would pull the coal out. And that's what he did.
Was he ever in any accidents?
Yes, he was trapped in PK mine in 1923, and for like a day and a half, he and 4 other guys.
Oh my!
And then when he was at the Compass mine, he had detonated a shot, and a lump of coal came ricocheting down the mine heading and hit him between the eyes, and he ended up having 9 stitches. And when you get that phone call, it was from the hospital. My mother thought he was killed, but fortunately he wasn't. And he lived to the ripe age of 80.
Oh, that's wonderful. What was his name, Joe?
Joe.
His name was Joe also. Where did you go to school?
Linden Grade School, and then Central Junior High, and then Washington Irving.
And I have to ask you, what was your first job?
My first real job was working for Bill Sharp with Sharp Electric. I was interested in being an electrician, and I worked summertime, part-time jobs there. Was the first one. Then I ended up in the glass factory, and then
Which glass factory?
Anchor Hawking, as we know it now, but it used to be Hazel Atlas glass. And from that time, then, I kind of a long story, but my mother, we were having dinner one evening, and she was slumped over. She had a stroke. And because I knew first aid and was able to clear her airway, and she survived that. And then the following year, she'd passed away with another stroke. And I decided that at the time, I enlisted into the military and was ready to ship out, and the sergeant came to me and said I had to report back to the Selective Service Office here in Clarksburg, and didn't give me any reason. And I was the only child and the last bloodline in our family. Well, I was upset because I 5 of my buddies, we all went together and we were enlisted. Well, I decided then if I can't serve my country through the military, then I'll do it by public service, and help organize the Harrison County Emergency Squad. At that time, funeral homes transported patients, and
Now, what year would this have been?
that was in 1965, 66, and the city had an old box truck that they used for an ambulance, and they traveled all over the county, and the city just couldn't afford to do that anymore. So ambulance service came to a stop, and a bunch of volunteers with an amateur radio club got together, took standard and advanced first aid. And that was the only training that you had at the time. And we met out at the B. Wayne Motel on Route 50, near the Carnation plant. And Hobart Burkhammer, who had a TV service here in town, and Andy Casto, and there was numbers of other guys. We all got together, took the training. We got the old ambulance restored. Lynch Stacy Funeral Home, which was downtown Clarksburg here, they donated us an ambulance, or a hearse that they had. It was a 1952 hearse, but it worked. And in August of 1966, the emergency squad, we started operation. It was all volunteer drivers and attendants. And then it just continually grew and got bigger and bigger. And then they built the new building over in the Northview section of Clarksburg, and kept expanding. And then it got so busy, so huge, then they had to go to paid. They started charging, not for the emergency calls, but for ambulance service and stuff like that.
Now, is that how you got started in public service and
Yes.
then wanting to be with the fire department?
Well, that, and at that same point in time, I joined the Civil Air Patrol, which was out at the airport, and got involved in search and rescue. And was there for 10 years, and was on a lot of plane crashes and various things like that. And then that's pretty much how I got started, and through the volunteer service. And then I was really interested in the fire department. Always had been. I went to work for the city in 2001. I'm sorry, 1971 is when I went to work for the city. I became the city safety director for the employees, and worked it a number of years, and then I became an assistant to the city manager, and set town hall meetings up and worked with council, and it just progressed. And then I had the opportunity to take the civil service exam for the fire department, and that was in 1975, and went to work on the fire department in 1975.
How did you start off in the fire department?
Is a firefighter.
Firefighter.
Yeah,
okay.
you had a job class was a firefighter, and then you moved up. You had to be there 2 years and take a certain level of training to become a driver. Now they're called engine operators, to operate the engines, because the fire service has become very, very technical, very specialized. From the old days where you grabbed the nozzle and you put the wet stuff on the red stuff. And 2 years as a driver before you could take an officer's exam. And I became a lieutenant in 1985. Was just appointed just prior to the flood that we had, the Great Flood of '85.
Yes.
And then you had to be a lieutenant 2 years before you're eligible for captain. So really, you had 10 years of service and a lot of training before you could actually, become a fire officer.
Who was your first fire chief when you started?
The first fire chief, well, let me back up a little bit. Hayward Burnside was fire chief, and Hayward had a stroke, and he died as an active fire chief. And shortly after that, there was Jack Ball was appointed. And Jack was there until 1970 till 79, 78. And then he retired, and then Bud Lance became fire chief. So your chiefs were in service for a long time, so you had experienced people that was running the department.
And you were fire chief from what year were you?
From 2099 or 2000 to 2005, 5 years.
And you got to talk to a lot of the older firefighters.
Oh yeah,
I bet they had some wonderful stories.
The Doyle Heflin had 44 years of service on the department, and he came on when you had a picture of the pumper truck in 1925, and he was on the department then. And the chief was J.J. Martin, Joe Martin. And he was chief until 75. Then after he retired, that's when Hayward Burnside became chief. And J.J. Martin, it was a household name. Everybody knew him. And during the Fire Prevention Week, the fire department did a lot of activities with the schools in the city, and show them how to use a fire extinguisher, how to do prevention, all those various things. And it just came up through the ranks. That's and sit down and talk to some of the old guys that were retired was a real plus. And again, the fire department wasn't very technical at that time with equipment, because it was just evolving. There were like major fires and disasters in the nation. So, training became a very important part. As it was with me, when I became chief, I appointed a designated training officer. It was Lieutenant Joe Bennett. And he put together a training program, and we were doing about 4,000 hours a year in training. And that continues today.
That's a wonderful thing to do.
Yes.
Because
yes.
those early guys did not have that, did
That's
they?
right. That's right.
But let's kind of talk about Clarksburg before 1888, before there was a paid fire department. How did they fight a fire back then, and how were they notified of a fire?
It was volunteer, and you got on a horse and you rode to the station.
Was it like a bucket brigade? Is that what because they didn't have, did they have fire trucks of any kind?
No, they had fire wagons.
Fire wagons.
The city established the first paid department in the city was in 1888. And it was only about 15, 20 men on the department.
Because they saw a need for that, because there were some pretty major fires.
Yes, there
before
was.
That time.
And the bucket brigade thing that you're talking about was a given. There were buckets, a dozen buckets or so on each fire wagon there, and we're talking about a horse-drawn wagon that was loaded with hose. And Clarksburg was very progressive in that time. They put a municipal water system in, which was unheard of. And I can tell you there's like 778 fire hydrants was when I was on the department. And there's been plenty more added. But that's how many hydrants were in the city. And you needed to know where they all were. And the fire department at that point, if you had a fire, you took the team of horses, pulled the wagon, hooked it up to the hydrant, and then people used buckets and fire hose to extinguish the fire.
So many articles that I read in those old papers, the problems that the firefighters had, either they'd be frozen up.
Yes.
Or there was a drought one year and they couldn't get any water to come out of the hydrants.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of obstacles.
Yes, because the city, the municipal water system, it came out of the West Fork River. And until they built a dam to retain water so they could pump it into the municipal system, and they had water tanks sitting on the hills that was gravity flow. They pumped the water up to them, and then you could open up a hydrant or the faucet in your house, and gravity forced the water out of your line. And in fact, the Traders Hotel fire, which everybody talked about, and that was one of the largest fires that the city ever had until the Anchor Hawking plant burnt.
Yeah, I want to talk about the Traders Hotel fire because I think anyone growing up in Clarksburg, you always heard about that fire.
Right, and it covered a whole block.
Tell the listeners a little bit, where was that located at, and how big was that hotel?
The hotel covered from 2nd Street to 3rd Street on Main. And it was separated. There was an alley that used to be next to P.J. Kelly's, was called Modoc Alley. And it went from 3rd to 2nd. So the hotel covered that entire block. And it was 4 stories. It had like bell towers on the ends, looked like a castle. And
it had the Grand Opera House set behind it, didn't it?
They had a theater in the hotel. And of course, it caught fire in the kitchen.
Now this was 1911, just so folks know this.
That's right, 1911. And the fire department, now we have multiple stations, at that time was on Hughes Avenue, where the newspaper office, the Exponent Telegram is. It was right next door to it. And they had horses in there. That's where they kept the horses. And the men had beds that they would sleep in.
How many men were on the fire department? Like maybe 6 men?
There was 17.
17. Okay.
17 men, and but they weren't all working at the same time.
They worked different shifts,
Different
but 24-hour shifts.
Yeah, and it provided 24-hour coverage for the citizens. Well, when the Traders Hotel fire started, there was a guy, he was told, he said, run to the fire department, tell them we've got a fire. And a guy got on a horse and rode the horse from up on Main Street next to the courthouse down to Traders, or down to Hughes Avenue, where the fire department was, and they ran in there and told them, says, the Traders Hotel's on fire. So they took the fire wagons with the teams of horses, put the harness on them, took off with the fire wagons, and right in front of the Waldo Hotel, there was a Civil War veteran walking across the street, and a team of horses ran over him, broke his leg.
Oh my.
Yeah. So they said, let somebody else, worry about it. And they put him on a wagon and took him. At that time, you had the St. Mary's Hospital and you had the Union Protestant Hospital, which was down on Washington Avenue. And, but the Traders Hotel, it burnt for 2 days to get it completely extinguished.
Were they able to bring any outside fire departments in to help?
Yeah, the outside fire department, they put a call in to the city of Fairmont and asked them. The city of Fairmont they were fortunate enough to have the steam-powered fire engines. And you kept a fire in the boiler, and if you got a call, you stoked it up real good and got a full head of steam. So by the time you got to the fire, you were ready to pump water and then use the steam pump. And you hooked the fire truck to the hydrant, and then you could have 3 or 4 hose lines come off of it. Well, see, Clarksburg didn't have one. And in fact, the following year in 1912, Nathan Goff, bought a steam-powered fire engine. It was called, the manufacturer was an Aaron's Fox. And he bought it for the city.
Because of this fire, they knew they needed
Yeah, they needed it.
So how did Fairmont get that here?
They put it, they took the steam fire engine and put it on a railroad flat car. And the steam engine brought it from Fairmont up the West Fork River to Clarksburg and unloaded it in Glen Elk, and they used it for 2.5, 3 days pumping water.
By that time, though, everything was destroyed.
Everything was down and gone, because it was
was
all a wooden structure.
And I was surprised how many businesses were in there. Like James and Law was in there.
Oh,
I think Palace
yeah.
Furniture was in there. There
Yep.
was like 20-some businesses that
Yes, it was.
lost everything they had.
It was like a mini mall. They had hotel rooms and lobby, and they had a little theater, and then they had the stores, the merchants and stuff that were in there. It was the place to go and stay if you were a visitor to Clarksburg.
And they never decided to rebuild it, so that's where Union Bank built and Stonewall Jackson Hotel, I guess, in that area.
Yep, exactly.
All rebuilt in that.
Yeah, that's they rebuilt, and it took several years before all the businesses moved back and started building their own buildings. Palace Furniture built down the street and on the north side of West Main. And the building still stands today.
Yeah, that fire, I think, changed a lot with the fire department here in Clarksburg. They knew they had to have more things
That's
to fight
exactly
fire
right.
with.
And being a young city, growing, and it took until 1918 before the city was able to set aside enough money to buy 3 brand new fire engines, and these were motor driven. They were built by American LaFrance Corporation, which was a fire truck manufacturer, and they were delivered in 1919. And a lot of the photos that you see today has the 1919 fire engines in them.
I want to talk about the horses, though, just a little bit,
Yeah.
because to me that's just fascinating. So they had the original station down on Hughes Avenue, and the livery stable, I guess, for the horses right there, right?
Yeah.
What year did they quit using the horses then? Was it when they immediately got those new trucks, or did they still use them?
Horses stayed on. We've had fire department records that we've discovered down in the basement, where they were paying 5 cents a bale. The city was buying hay at 5 cents a bale to feed the horses, to keep them fed and watered. And the fire department itself stayed down next to the newspaper office on Hughes Avenue until 1926.
Oh, okay.
And in 1926, the current fire station that's downtown opened its doors for the first time in 1926. And it was the latest state of the art. It had the brass poles to slide down from your bedroom upstairs, and it had automatic doors at the time. You pull on a cable and the doors would spring open. And it was in full service in 1926.
Well, I can take a moment. I found this really interesting article in one of the Clarksburg newspapers about those horses going to a fire, and if you don't mind me reading
No, go ahead.
This was from October 3rd, 1905, and the headline was "Small Blaze and Accident." And the story went on to say that the alarm of fire was sounded at 2:30 this afternoon. The blaze occurred at the residence of J.T. Condry on Poplar Street. The fire department responded promptly and extinguished the blaze. The run to the fire from 4th Street down the long straight vista of Pike Street was a picturesque and inspiring sight. The 2 magnificent black horses were in full gallop and seemed to take as much interest as the fire laddies who were holding on to the swaying truck. It takes a master horseman to descend Pike Street Hill, cross the bridge, and make the turn at the Catholic Church in a full gallop and escape any accident. Strangely enough, though, the blaze was at the dwelling of the fire chief, J.T. Condry, who was driving the wagon. The excellent system he has instilled into the department served him in good stead on this occasion. I love that story.
Wow. Wow.
Can you imagine those beautiful black horses pulling that wagon down
really?
Pike Street
Yep.
to that fire, and it's the fire chief's house.
That's interesting. In fact, that's one of the newer stories that I've heard, and my source was from the old firefighters, and there's dozens of stories like that.
Oh, tell me some of them, Joe, if you can remember.
It was somebody, and they were always playing jokes on each other, and you had to bring your own food, and whatever cooking you did. You had to cook it yourself at the fire station. Well, with the after the city bought the American LaFrance trucks that were motor driven, the Aaron's Fox steam fire truck was then basically taken out of service. They didn't keep a fire in it, because you had to have an inspection on them. And
that could be kind of dangerous too, couldn't it? Blowing up or something?
Yeah. And that happened in a lot of places in the United States. And you had to really know what you were doing with steam. It was like firing a steam locomotive. Too much pressure, it'll blow up. But they had an issue where somebody built a fire, took the garbage and put it in the Aaron's Fox. This is down on Traders Alley, or not Traders, but Hughes Avenue. And it filled the building with smoke, and everybody was screaming and hollering and saying the fire department's on fire, and it was just smoke. But there was a big crowd gathered, and until they could put the fire out. It wasn't a very big fire.
I bet they got ribbed pretty bad on that.
Yeah, they did. They did. And then there was a policy only during the time of an emergency when they needed a standby fire truck, they could bring it and build a fire in it. But that in itself would take some time.
I read and I don't have it in front of me, but I remember reading an article in one of those old Clarksburg papers about when they got rid of the horses. And it was really a touching little article because they were inviting the people in Clarksburg to come and say goodbye to the horses, because I'm sure they were a part of everyone's life, like
yes, they were.
A fire department is today.
Yeah, they were real docile, and you fed when you fixed your meal, you fed hay and grain to the horses, so they were ready to go, and watered them. And but the new fire station, there wasn't any horses in there, although there's been pictures taken of Clydesdales pulling the old Aaron's Fox steam fire engine.
Yes, we have that here at the museum.
Out in front of the fire station, but they were never housed there. That was for a parade. In fact, if you look at the photo real close, it says Fireman's Ball, and they were advertising for this Fireman's Ball.
So tell me, for the folks that don't know, where were all the fire stations at in Clarksburg? Because there were several, weren't there?
That's right. And that was at the city limit line. The fire department didn't go out of the city till later years. The main station, which is on Main Street, corner of Main and 6th, was the main station that everybody worked out of. Now see, again, Clarksburg, they had phone service. There was phones all over the city.
So very early before other towns would have them.
Yeah, very early. And the second station was built at, we refer to it as the Gulf Plaza Bridge. At that point in time, there wasn't a bridge. Cecil Highland Sr. built, it was called the Highland Edition, it was a residential thing, and he had a bridge built to service that area. Well, the main, to go out of Clarksburg heading south, you turn down Philippi Pike Street, which Philippi Pike, it went to Philippi. It went out through Eastview, Anmore, Brushy Fork, and up where Route 57 is, and then went on into Philippi. And it was built right at that intersection where you turned off of Main Street and you turned on to Philippi. The fire station was right. It still exists. The building's still there. It's the last substation building that's in existence.
Did it just have like one fire truck in it?
One fire truck, and you quartered underneath in the basement. That's where you slept. That's where you cooked your meals, and there wasn't any television then.
So the big fire truck was up above your head.
Right above you, and I've been there years ago when it was still a station, because I had a couple friends that were firefighters there, and you could hear the concrete every once in a while crack, making the noise, but it wasn't unsafe where it was going to collapse, because it still exists today. The third station that was built was where Wendy's sits today, down on Pike Street, West Pike. It's set there, and the guys lived upstairs, and they had a brass pole that they slid down, and the other American Defiance truck was housed there. Now and it's gone, and the station that replaced it is the West End station next to Cupall Towers, Point Comfort. that was all. There was a lot of little additions and stuff.
So you kind of covered all areas of the city with,
Yes.
with something.
Yeah, and even when there was a flood, we would put an engine across the railroad tracks in Staley. We would park an engine over there, and that's where the men had to stay. And because trains were running, hauling coal, and if you had a train go through, you couldn't get through to get to the fire. So that's why we moved an engine over there, and it would stay. There was a golf station over in Staley where I believe there's a pizza shop there now.
Yeah, I think.
But
Little
in the flood of '85, we put an engine at the hospital, and we also had another engine in Staley.
Now let me ask you about those early days. What would a fireman have been paid, let's say in 1900?
The firefighter got paid $4 a day in 1888 when you went onto the fire department.
But that was probably good money back then, I would
Oh,
assume.
it was.
Did they have any kind of protective gear when they went to fight these fires at all?
They had canvas coats, and they had rubber boots. Of course, all that stuff would burn too.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they had the traditional fire helmet. They called it the New Yorker because the New York City Fire Department, everybody copied what they were doing. And those helmets were made out of leather. They were very heavy, and that's what they used.
Did you have a lot of, let's just say like the father would be a fireman and his son would be a fireman or daughter would be a
Yes.
firefighter? I mean, that occurred a lot.
When I went on the department, we had the Hamricks. There were the father and son. Their last name was Hamrick, and in fact, they worked together at the Northview Fire Station.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and see, the Northview Station wasn't built until around 1945, 44. And it was designed as like a Western fire station. So it had a Southwest look to it with block and brick and mortar stuccoed on. And that the Northview station covered all the way almost to Glen Falls. And but the two Hamrick fellows, they worked there together.
Were there any deaths from a fireman in the line of duty?
Line of duty death, there was, and there was only one. Thank the good Lord for that.
That's amazing.
And
after all those years.
it was Munthing Motors Company that was located down on Pike Street, across from the current Eagles. Today they sit across the street. The fellow was on the fire, overexertion, real strenuous, and he got sick. So they sent him back to the station. And later he went over to St. Mary's Hospital. It was just walk across the street, and he passed away. He had an apparent heart attack, and that was in 1957.
That's amazing, though, Joe, that there weren't more casualties in
Oh
all
my
the
God!
long history.
You didn't have self-contained breathing apparatuses. You went in there and you breathed all that smoke and heat, and you'd cough and gag, And the guy said, "Come on, what's the matter with you, boy? Get in there. Let's get this fire put out."
And you just go.
Yeah, it was the macho thing. But, and that all changed shortly before I came on the department in 76 or 75. And they had an old mask, like a gas mask that you'd
Like
use
they
in
had
the
in
war,
World War I?
ex-military. And that's what you, in a canister. And you pulled a piece of tape off of it and you breathed, and it would, had chemicals in it that would turn the air, oxygen enriched, into oxygen so you could breathe it. And they only lasted like 20, 25 minutes. And then the bottled air was the way to go. Of course, that's what we use now. And you never, even on an auto fire outside, you wear your self-contained breathing apparatus because of the poisonous vapors and smoke. And everything that we have today in our lives is plastics and chemicals, and you could get overcome pretty easy.
I just can't imagine the mindset you must have. Like, I'm thinking of like the old firefighters standing in front of that Traders Hotel. What mindset they had, like what are we going to do?
Yeah.
What are we going to do now?
That's right.
But let's talk about some of the bigger fires that happened after Traders. I'm sure theaters were a fire trap, because before they had the safety film, you had that old nitrate film that could go up like dynamite.
Yeah, you could actually ignite it with a cigarette.
Yeah.
And
plus your projectors had the open flame on them, the arc light.
Carbon arc, yeah.
I have heard, I interviewed a gentleman back in the 80s whose father was a film projectionist at the Moores Opera House. And he told me that as a projectionist in the theater, if there was a fire in the projection room, they had steel doors and windows that came down, and you were literally trapped in there to burn to death because they didn't want the fire to go out to the theater.
Yeah.
So I think Robinson Grand, was that a big fire back in the...
That fire occurred in late, it was near New Year's in 1939, 1940. And that's how it started.
Really?
Was in the projection room. And it literally burned it clear to the ground. And it took several weeks to clear it out. But, and I'm not sure of his first name, the Robinson family.
Was it Claude, I believe? Claude Robinson?
Claude Robinson, I think maybe that's right. They decided to build it back. And the decor in there was Art Deco, and it was one of the most modern theaters in the East, and they had a lot of people that came and performed there, and of course Madge Dowds, who bought it after the Robsons passed away. She kept the tradition on, she kept it up, and thanks to her, we have a theater there that we didn't have to build a new one.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
And, yeah, it's absolutely.
Were there other theaters in town?
There was the Ritz Theater, set where the library is today, the current library, and now we have a vacant lot, or the bank building. That sits on 4th Street. And that was the Moores Opera House. And it was built where the entrance was off 4th Street, but the back entrance was on Trader's Alley. And they had, at a young age, I would think I was in the 5th grade, they brought a theater production down from Pittsburgh, and it was the first time that I rode a school bus, And because I walked to school, I went to Linden grade school, so there was no buses running.
So that was a big deal to ride a school bus.
So they had an opera there. They had it in the morning, in the afternoon, and they had it for countywide. It took 4 days, and there was 2 performances a day, because then at night they'd show movies. But those theater, that, and then on Main Street, where the gallery is now, the photo gallery and art gallery down the street here. It used to be Kyle and Company, was the Orpheum Theater. And it closed early on in the mid-60s, 70s, because there were 4 theaters. And I can remember paying 21 cents for a ticket to go see a movie. And then the big deal was at the Robinson Grand. 10 Pepsi caps and 10 cents.
Got you into a movie.
Every Saturday. And boy, you would go around and dig those pop caps out of the garbage or a store somewhere. And
go to see a Western or something.
Well, it was cartoons, at least a dozen cartoons, and then a Class B movie. And then came out of there, and that was, I got 50 cents. So it cost me 10 cents to get into the theater with the Pepsi caps, and then I spent 15 cents for a bottle of soda and popcorn for 5 cents. Then on the way home, we would walk down Pike Street to the Sanitary Hot Dog. And that was a place to get a hot dog.
I have heard many stories about how good that hot dog chili was. Oh my goodness!
There was a Greek family that had it, and they were the best hot dogs. Really good. And you could get a hot dog for 10 cents, a bottle of pop for 10 cents, and a donut or a candy bar for a nickel. And that was the Saturday. That's what made it. But
good days, huh?
Yeah, and then unfortunately, the irony of it is that building burnt down. They closed, and it had been vacant for a number of years. But Jerry's Auto Supply was right next to it, and we had a major fire.
When was that?
That was in 71, 72. It was the Jerry's Auto Fire, Sanitary Hot Dog. They were all combined into 2 buildings. And then the one we always worried about was the Working Man's Store, because it was a wooden structure building.
Oh,
and
okay. And an older building too.
Oh, yeah. And then we had the ice plant that was down in the west end of town. And it was about a 6-story building. And the walls were 24 inches thick, filled with sawdust.
Oh, my.
And it caught fire, and that was another major fire in the city.
And no sprinkler system of any kind.
None. It wasn't required. See, the fire codes, they were very minimal. You could have a 100-room hotel and didn't have to have it sprinkled or anything.
What in your opinion, let's just say within the past, 60 years, what was the most destructive fire the fire department had to fight here in town that you could think of?
Well, the most destructive was the Anchor Hawking plant.
So tell me about that.
There was 17,000 tons of paper, big blocks of paper that were 4 foot by 4 foot square and 5 foot long, and they were shredded paper, baled, and it was being stored there. And there was a guy came in the fire station and said, "Hey, you got a big fire in Anchor Hawking." And at the same time, we had a house fire in Heartland. So we split the call and As soon as we pulled out of the station, you could see the smoke. And it burnt for 3 months, 18 days before it was totally out.
My goodness.
And because those big blocks of paper would just smolder, and you could take a stick and hit it, and the ash would fall off, and it was like a briquette, a charcoal briquette, and it was just glowing. And put the thermometer on it, it'd be 1,000 degrees, and it all had to be removed by backhoes, dozers in there.
Did that shut them down for a while?
Oh, they were gone. It was an empty building.
It was empty at that time.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it had to be pulled out, wetted down, worked back and forth, and then put over in a pile. And it had to sit there like 3 or 4 days before they could load it into an approved EPA truck that would transport it to an EPA garbage dump over in Ohio, because of all the chemicals and everything that was in the glass factory. But that was probably, it was a very costly thing, because we had to have firefighters on site 24 hours a day for 3.5 months.
Oh my, so that had to have been the most expensive and the most destructive.
Yeah, it was probably the most expensive. And that bill was footed by the owner and his insurance company. And it was a game changer also.
Now what about, I always heard growing up, my mom and dad always talked about the arcade fire.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember that, but I think that happened, what, in the 1950s?
57.
57.
It was in October.
Tell me a little bit about what you know of that.
I was in the 5th grade, and I can remember my mother meeting me after school on Linden Avenue, where Linden grade school was, and I was kind of scared. I said, what's the matter, Mom? She says, come on, we're going to go, they got a big fire uptown, we're going uptown and look at it. Oh, this was an adventure. So for 10 cents, you got on the bus and rode the bus into town. It started at night. The arcade building was a building that had an arch.
And it was located where, Joe? So
Where
people know.
the J.C. Penney's building,
On Main
now
Street?
the biometrics folks have the facility there. And it went from Main to Washington Avenue. You could walk through it. And there were a dozen merchants in there. There was an ice cream shop.
Aaron Shoe, I believe.
Aaron
was in
Shoes, Tom McCann, Buster Brown Shoes. They all had stores in there.
It was like a little mini mall.
It was like a mini mall.
Did it have a glass roof to it? Or
a glass roof, and in the summertime or when it was a sunny day, it was nice because it kind of warmed the air up, and then you would get, the wind would blow through it, and it was cold wind, especially in the wintertime. And but all those businesses were damaged by the fire, and it was one that they had to have firefighters there for about 2 to 3 days to get it completely extinguished.
So
It was
another
smolder.
big fire lost a lot of businesses there.
And then across the street we had Freelanders. There was a big fire there. That was it was a department store. And then after the fire, they built a new building, which still exists. And that was a large fire. You had the Strand Pool Room down on Pike Street. It burnt.
Burnt practically that whole block, didn't it? I mean, most.
Pretty much. And the old, not the Evans Hotel, I think it was Evans.
Yeah, I think Evans.
Yeah,
yes.
was there, and that's where the fire started. And then it migrated into the 2 buildings next door, and basically pretty much burnt the block down.
Did the Waldo Hotel ever catch on fire?
No,
No. Okay.
no, the kitchen and that area was in behind next to where the federal building is there now. But there might have been a mattress fire, something like that, and
There were some big warehouse fires too. Wasn't there a warehouse over in Glen Elk or
it
somewhere?
was the Rose Furniture
Yes.
warehouse. It was a 6-story building. And what was interesting is the railroad operator, the dispatcher that was working in the tower over in Glen Elk, that he dispatched the trains and that sort of thing. He called Grafton to tell his boss, hey, we have a big fire over here in Glen Elk. You really need to see this thing. Flames are coming out of the windows. And then he realized there's no fire trucks there.
Oh, my.
His call was the first call for that fire truck.
Oh, my.
And then, of course, it burnt for about 4 days.
And what year was that? Do you remember?
That was in 70, I believe it was in 1977 or 78. And it burnt completely down. Well, they had to have a wrecking ball come in and hit it and knock it the rest of the way down. That was a major fire there. And then in Glen Elk, across the railroad tracks, there was a box factory that they built wooden boxes and shipped. And it was a Lang & Chris box factory. And next to it, there was a junkyard. It was an Italian fella, came to this country and started a business there with scrap. And his name was Joe Scalise. And he spoke with broken English, and that box factory caught on fire. And they told this story at the fire station all the time. And then you could dial directly to the fire station. There wasn't any 911 then. But he called and he spoke with broken English, and he says, the Clarksburg Fire Department? We said, yes. He says, you got to come to Glen Elk, a big fire. And he said, what's the address? He says, never mind. He says, so you come, you see. And when they pulled out of the station, you could see the fire in the sky and a column of smoke. And it burnt that building. Then later on, Logan Corporation, they built and stored steam engines and mine equipment and stuff in there. And then you had the casket company. It was across the street. We'd been there to multiple fires. It was all wooden and sawdust and lacquer and stuff that they would put on the casket.
Aren't you amazed, Joe, that there weren't more fires, though, because of all the wooden structures and open flames and kerosene lamps? And
Yep. And it was pretty much education, being educated, because the fire department used to have programs in the fall of the year during Fire Prevention Week about home safety and that sort of thing. And that's another thing that sparked my interest, was the fire department came to our grade school and told
I
us
remember
about
that.
it.
Yeah. Sparky
and had fire drills and that sort of thing.
And that's good for children to learn that and to not be afraid.
Right. Because the fire in Chicago that killed, it was a school fire, Catholic school. It's on the date in October that they celebrate Fire Prevention Week. Was that week that I can't remember the name of it, St. Francis School or something like that, killed 64 students.
Oh my!
They burnt in that fire, and hence from that day on, every year to recognize it was Fire Prevention Week.
I know I love to look through old newspapers, and it was every paper. You'd see like a child catching their clothes on fire and dying.
Yes.
It just happened all the time.
Wool was a big contributor. You bought wool clothes all the time. Women would have a wool nightgown
Or their long dresses.
Yeah, and you had, gas fires, and you get close to it, and it would ignite, and people would catch themselves on fire and get burnt. And there was a lot of that, throughout the years. But we've been talking about the huge fire. Another huge fire was the 7-Up Balling Company, and it was down on Pike Street where the Eagle sits today.
Oh, okay.
And it was in the fall of the year, and that building caught fire and burnt. And it burnt, that was the first time. The second time, the Eagles burnt. They had a place there, and it burnt several buildings. I can remember that one very well because it was about 9 degrees above zero and soaking wet, and the coat was frozen. You could take it off and just set it on the ground and it would stand up. And there was a fatality in that one. There was a guy that was staying in there. But there's been so many. But now the fire departments are more EMS oriented because we've saved dozens of lives by getting to a person's house. You call for an ambulance. Well, in Clarksburg, when you call for an ambulance, the fire department gets notified immediately. So the quickest engine that can get to that house goes. Start CPR, mouth to mouth. If they're cut, do all the first aid. And then when the ambulance gets there, you got paramedics that can continue on, and the fire service, in fact, all across the country, is becoming more and more professional with patient care.
That's a wonderful thing, because think of all the lives you're saving now.
Yes.
Where you couldn't do that
right,
before.
Exactly. And that's a huge thing. And we've done a very good job in educating the public about home safety. So, the numbers of fires have reduced somewhat, but auto accidents, injuries, all that has increased.
I know, like in the older papers, I think a lot of the problem in those early days of electricity and gas lines.
That's right.
They didn't know
what to do.
They didn't know what to do, how to adjust things, and things
Right.
would just explode.
Right.
You mentioned, and I want to touch on this a bit, about the '85 flood.
Mm-hmm.
What was that experience like, going through that? For people that weren't born during that time, try to explain how bad that flood was.
I worked at the fire department for 5.5 days before I got relieved to go home. We had early warning here in the city because we had connections with the weather service in Charleston, and they used to have a weather office up in Elkins. And they kept us informed over the phone. And they said, you need to prepare for a catastrophic flood. Well, city council, the city manager, we set up a command center at the main station and started early that evening and evacuating people, getting them ready, because the weather service said, you're going to experience a catastrophic flood.
Did you have any idea it was going to be as bad as it was?
No, none whatsoever. Because the last big flood we had was in '67. And we had people like in Heartland said, oh, in '67 it got up to that first step right there. We're all right. 2:30 in the morning, we were getting them off the front porch. The river rose that much. So it was pretty, it was the highest since 1888. We had a massive flood in 1888 in Clarksburg, and destroyed the railroad between Weston and Clarksburg, and
The covered bridges, the mills,
oh yeah,
wiped them out.
Yeah,
all on the creek.
Everywhere. But it was sort of unbelievable because you're just not accustomed to that sort of thing. I can remember going down Pike Street where McDonald's is and saw the water, the river was up on the steps in McDonald's.
That's hard to believe, isn't
Yeah.
it? When you go
And
down there today.
Kroger's and Wendy's, they were all underwater.
The canteen.
Yeah, the canteen was underwater. There was about 3 foot of water over the West End Bridge.
How many? What was the most difficult rescue, I guess, during that time? Because you had to get boat. Where did you get the boats to go out to these people?
We had the city. We had a boat,
Okay.
and then there was a couple of people that were residents that donated their boats. Said,
Oh, great.
Here, you can use our boat, and we didn't have a motor or anything on it. You had a row, and the water was pretty swift. And a real difficult rescue that I was on was down on First Street. Right off of Pike. There were people trapped on the second floor in their houses, and we had to make our way to the house to get the boat anchored so we could get them off and get them in the boat and then come back. And of course, fortunately, we hooked a rope to it, to the boat, so when we got out there, then they could pull us back. But that was...
Out of the second story.
But again, was early warning. The radio stations were broadcasting, prepare, get out, move to higher ground now. And that in itself saved a lot of people.
And I think before we wrap this up, the other thing that sticks in my mind is where were you on 9/11 when the World Trade Center was attacked? And I'll never forget that day. Like, you were there when Kennedy's assassination. You knew where
Right,
you
I
were.
remember that. Mm-hmm.
You knew where you were and what was going on.
Right.
And to see those heroic firefighters and police officers, first responders, going into those buildings.
Yeah. In our emergency plan, the fire department has, and the police department, and the city in general, I was in Morgantown at the fire academy down there. I was going down for a meeting, and I got a phone call, cell phones then. I got a phone call, and a friend of mine said, I just heard that a plane crashed into the World Trade Center. Okay. I mean, it was a small plane, big plane.
I think that's what we all thought. It was a small plane.
It was just a small plane. And I thanked him and went on. And when I got to the fire school there in Morgantown, they said, bad disaster in New York City. And I looked at it and I saw it burning, and I said, man, that's not good. I said, that building will probably collapse. And then the second plane hit. Well, when that occurred, game changer. I said, well, I've got to leave. I'm going back to Clarksburg. And we have a planned emergency operations that the FBI is involved in, all of the state agencies, and that we need to protect, because we have a lot of very important businesses that do important things here in the Clarksburg area. And knowing that, I got back and went to the city manager's office and reported to him, along with the police chief was there, and other department heads. And we were, concerned about the FBI center, what's a target, what's not a target. And then when the plane hit the Pentagon, we knew then America's under attack.
Right.
Yeah, and we need to act accordingly. And we started making preparations, and we have sensitive businesses that are involved with the government, that what if somebody tried to do something here or there. But that was another sleepless day,
You'll never forget that.
No,
day
never
if you
forget
lived
it.
through it.
And the city council, we met that night, and the city council basically said, whatever the fire and police department need, just do it, make it happen. And they were involved in the decision process too. So I must say that the council, they were spot on, in you know, all ties, everything are off. Do what you got to do to keep our citizens safe.
We were united.
Everything. And I had never experienced that kind of camaraderie before, where everybody came together.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking at the clock on the wall, Joe. I'm probably going to have to wrap this up. I tell you, I've enjoyed this conversation a great deal.
Anytime.
I hope you come back.
Anytime.
I
Just
hope you do.
give me a call. Be more than happy to share. It's the history for everybody.
Right.
Because you know, like the fire and police department touch a lot of lives.
We do, and you're our heroes. And thank you for your service. And I would encourage the listeners to make a visit here to Clarksburg, to our Clarksburg History Museum, and go down the street to the Central Fire Station and go down and tell those folks down there how much they're appreciated, because they are.
That's good.
And I thank you. Thank you for coming.
Quite welcome. Anytime.
Thank you, and everyone, tune in again for another visit with someone we'll have next month. And I close this with my every program, that just remember that make each and every day count, because you are making history today. So thank you until next time. This is Martha Jett, and have a good day. Thank you.
There's a piece you've given me that's yours alone. Take me in like a child to the gentle of your wild West Virginia. I'm coming home. Your West Virginia mountain melodies. There's a new river singing to me. Oh, this time it's wild and free. Your West Virginia mountain